Good morning and good afternoon once again. And I would like to welcome you all to our final PIPIN webinar series, which is webinar 8. And today we will look into this final series, look into inclusive nature-based solution, traditional knowledge, and GESI, integrating wisdom and inclusion for resilient community-driven solutions. So our expected outcome for today is to understand the value of indigenous knowledge in the Pacific NbS context and how to incorporate it into professional practices. Also learn the principle of GESI and their critical role in community-driven NbS projects. And also we will hear testimonies from local leaders who are working on the ground and practitioners on the role of inclusion and traditional knowledge in fostering resilience, culturally relevant solutions. And finally, build capacity to design NbS initiatives that are inclusive, community-centered, and grounded in indigenous knowledge and practices. So that is our expected outcome for today. And I have shared the agenda with you. So briefly, this is the agenda for today. It will start at 10 and then it will conclude at 12 New Year time. It's 2 hours webinar. And we will start with we have like this webinar is divided it is inclusive of indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, and also GESI. So we have specialist experts from our team SPC, and also we have people on the experts from the ground who will share what they are doing on the ground. So this is the agenda, and I will not go into detail, but I will allow each speaker to introduce themselves when they start with their deliverables. So these are our speakers for today. We have Devin Holiday. She's our Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Officer at SPC. And then we have Kara. Kara is ESS and GESI Officer with our Climate Finance Project team at SPC. And we have Sadie. Sadie is Information and Knowledge Management Officer with SPC. And then we have Francie. She's a team leader culture for development team at SPC. And finally, we have Sarah. Sarah is a Blue Carbon Project coordinator. She has done a lot of work on the ground and she's from Conservation International Fiji. So these are the speakers that you'll meet very soon. So that's the line of speakers we have today, and I hope you'll enjoy the session, the final session of PIPIN webinar series. So let's begin our journey today by exploring how inclusive principles can shape resilient communities. So our first speaker, Devin, brings a deep insight into integrating GESI in nature-based solutions. So over to you, Devin. So while Devin
Are you sharing your screen with Kashni?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yourself,
Thank
I'm
you.
sharing my screen.
Just to preface, I've just finished a 26-hour journey and I've picked up a bug. So if I start sneezing, I may turn off my camera to spare you all. But yes, I'll get into it. Is the screen up or can I not see it?
I'm just trying. Just give me a moment to type in.
Thank you. So, Mbula, Bozu, Tuafalava, and warm Pacific greetings. My name is Devin Holiday, and I'm the GESI and Gender Assessment Action Plan Officer within the Climate Change Division here at SPC. And so today in my presentation, we're going to set the stage for a vital conversation, how nature-based solutions can support resilience in the Pacific only when they are socially inclusive. And so this session frames the why GESI matters deeply for sustainable climate adaptation and biodiversity protection. And so we'll be looking at inclusive resilience, not as a buzzword or a checkbox exercise, but as a necessity. And so this presentation is conceptual and strategic, building a shared understanding for the more practical session that will follow. Next slide, please. Or I don't know if I can control this slide. Thank you. Okay. So the Pacific region faces intensifying climate change, as we all know, and biodiversity loss, which are deeply interconnected. And so these aren't just environmental problems, they are social ones affecting food systems, water sources, shelter, and culture as well. And so women, indigenous people, and other marginalized groups often rely most on natural ecosystems and in turn are also the most vulnerable to their degradation. And so when we talk about solutions, we have to ask, who are we protecting and empowering through these solutions? Next slide, please. So GESI is not just about fairness, it's about making climate and nature interventions effective and sustainable. When we leave out certain voices, especially those of women, people with disabilities, indigenous groups, we miss crucial knowledge and leadership opportunities. And these communities often have long histories of adapting to changing environments, and their insights can strengthen resilience for everyone. So this means that nature-based solutions must be co-designed with those who are most impacted and not for them. Next slide, please. Um, so why does GESI matter in nature-based solutions? Well, firstly, exclusion weakens outcomes. Inclusive processes leads to better governance, stronger social cohesion, and more sustainable solutions. And GESI also brings local ownership and ensures diverse needs are addressed and creates space for shared leadership. And inclusion is also about justice. So those who contribute least to climate change are often the most affected. Thus, nature-based solutions must be tools for equity as well. And let's finally remember this, nature-based solutions are not a neutral intervention. If we're not intentional about inclusion, we can unintentionally reinforce inequality. Next slide, please. We are not starting from scratch in pursuing mainstream GESI. There are global and regional frameworks to guide us. So firstly, we have the IUCN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solution, which reminds us that nature-based solutions must address societal challenges and be inclusive, transparent, and empowering. Regionally, there is the Pacific Islands Framework for Nature Conservation, which is grounded in community-based and culturally rooted solutions. And so these frameworks legitimize GESI integration, not just as a best practice, but as a standard. Next slide, please. So let's zoom in on a few guiding principles that make nature-based solutions inclusive in practice. So one is ensuring free, prior, and informed consent, FIPIC for short, especially for indigenous peoples and local communities. Another is valuing traditional governance structures such as village chiefs or community elders and finding ways to include women, youth, and marginalized voices within these systems. So we'll go more into these in the next slides, but think of these principles as foundational stones for rights-based, nature-based solutions. So FIPIC stands, or I'll just go into the letters and what they mean in practice. So free means no coercion, prior means before any decisions are made, informed means accessible, clear information, and consent means that their choice is respected. So FIPIC is a collective right, and communities must be able to say no or shape how a project moves forward. And it's the right of communities to give or withhold their consent prior as well as any stage during the project of any activity that may affect their rights, lands, resources, territories, livelihoods, and food security. And in the Pacific, this isn't just a formality, it's a reflection of self-determination, cultural survival and sovereignty, and respect. And FIPIC also helps us to strengthen accountability and legitimacy for any nature-based solution. Next slide, please. So across the Pacific, customary systems are central to how land, water, and forests are managed. Chiefs, councils, and elders play critical roles, but these systems are not always inclusive. However, making them inclusive does not mean breaking down these systems or doing away with traditional governance, but broadening them to reflect the realities of all people living in the community today. So this can involve building awareness within traditional systems or creating parallel inclusive spaces for decision making. So one way to do this is firstly recognizing and elevating existing inclusive practices. So many Pacific communities already have women's church groups, youth committees, or environmental groups, and we should try engaging with these groups actively. Another way is by embedding inclusive roles in governance for nature-based solutions. So you can set up community working groups for nature-based solutions that include both traditional leaders, but also representatives of women, youth, people with disabilities, etc. And then also inviting technical support from environmental experts. And what we should really do is ensure that these groups have decision-making power, not just advisory roles. Next slide, please. So a gender responsive approach really asks multiple questions. Firstly, it will ask, how do nature-based solutions affect men, women, and others differently? What barriers exist to implementing in an inclusive way? What social norms are at play in our project implementation area? And also, how can we ensure everyone benefits from the nature-based solution? So it is essential to understand the differentiated impacts and roles of all community members, as this gives way to varying needs and capacities in relation to the solution itself. And so we must have targeted actions to ensure that no one is left behind. And so I'll give some examples. We should look to address time poverty challenges, as well as the gender division of labor, especially when we're rolling out trainings or asking community members to participate in governance processes. So really thinking about, okay, what time we're scheduling, who is able to make this time, where are we hosting them, these meetings, et cetera, to make sure everyone can come to the table. We should also be looking to improve access to natural resources required for sustainable livelihood strategies and working to make them more inclusive. We should also be addressing access to assets, finance, or specialized training to implement nature-based solutions. And lastly, we should be providing more accessible climate science and information. Um, Now on to including different groups. So for people of diverse SOGS, and SOGS stands for sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics. Um, so people of diverse SOGS often face discrimination in land tenure, access to livelihood resources, and participation in governance. And so their inclusion not only strengthens the human rights basis of nature-based solutions, but the sustainability of the nature-based solution itself. And so nature-based solutions also must include people with disabilities, not just in participation, but in design, implementation, and benefits. And so this means designing nature-based solutions that accommodate different mobility and accessibility needs, and also ensuring disaster risk reduction measures are inclusive, et cetera. And so this is about really shifting from a do no harm to actively doing good. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide outlines the pathway. It's not always linear, but it shows what meaningful GESI integration looks like. So for instance, in your stakeholder analysis, you really want to identify who you're working with, but also who is left out potentially. And then you'd like to do a gender and social analysis, looking at how are different groups affected by the solution as well as problem. Next, you want to have a co-design and have inclusive decision-making processes, ensuring that marginalized voices are shaping the project. And in your implementation, we want to ensure that activities are responsive and adaptive to diverse needs represented in the community. And lastly, for our monitoring and evaluation, we want to measure who benefits, who doesn't, and why, And we want to disaggregate data wherever possible by gender, age, disability, ethnicity. And this helps us to learn and adapt and see where our solutions are falling short for certain groups. Next slide, please. Okay, so to wrap this up, before I hand over to Kara, GESI makes nature-based solutions stronger, smarter, and more sustainable. Inclusion is not an afterthought, it's really the backbone of effective environmental solutions. And the Pacific has a rich foundation of relational values, traditional knowledge, and collective decision-making. And so these are powerful assets that practitioners should really put to practice. And the next session with Kara will move into the how, translating these concepts into real world action. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Devin, for that thoughtful perspective on inclusive resilience. Now let's build on that with some practical tools and real world examples from Kara.
Thank you, Devin. Thank you, Rakeshni. Good morning, everyone. I'm Cara Medina. I'm with the Climate Finance Unit, currently taking on the role of environmental and social safeguards, as well as our gender and social inclusion officer. So where Devin talked a bit about the principles of how we think about gender and social inclusion in nature-based solutions, we want to now look at how that looks like in practice. How have we done this in design? And for today, we will zoom in a bit on a particular approach that we have looked at and a project that we've done under the Climate Finance Unit, and have a look at how those principles had been applied. So maybe just to set the tone or set the stage for how the rest of this short presentation will go. When we look at broadly our climate finance approach and design, we think about the approach that and the understanding that GEDSI is a holistic and cross-cutting lens when we are designing NbS projects. So major climate funds such as GCF, the Green Climate Fund, and the Adaptation Fund, and several other bilateral climate finance donors often require GEDSI integration in their proposals and reporting. So whether or not that refers to, the very specific gender assessment and action plan, or perhaps the environmental and social impact assessment and management plan, stakeholder engagement plan, the grievance redress mechanism, or the indigenous peoples policy, we come from the approach and the outlook that these are all connected, and how they are woven together in the design overall strengthens the quality or the extent to which we are able to embed GEDSI in NbS. Maybe something that I will stress here is across our projects that we have been designing and currently implementing and reporting against is how crucial it is to make sure that monitoring, evaluation, and learning are embedded against these principles, these technical elements in embedding GEDSI. So we see it as all essential in demonstrating how we embed GEDSI. And we can have a look at how we've done this in one of our projects that were recently approved by the Adaptation Fund. This was in 2023. This is in Fiji. It's called Strengthening the Adaptive Capacity of Coastal Communities Through Nature-Based Seawalls. So the project will run for 5 years. The Ministry of Agriculture and Waterways is the lead. Over here on the left, you'll see that this is one of the sites, the Nambila village, one of the proposed sites where we will be constructing seawalls. So over these 5 years, we are planning to construct 4 kilometers of seawall to provide direct protection to 2,400 direct beneficiaries in 14 villages. At the same time, we are enhancing institutional capacity So in the upkeep and the maintenance, and strengthening not just the local community, but the local government as well, in being able to deliver this project and maintain this nature-based seawall. Let's have a look then at how we applied the framework that Devin had presented earlier. If we think about who is at risk and what are the gaps, so both that lens of identifying and then analyzing. How did we go about this? So again, coming from the perspective that when we do stakeholder consultations, we come with a lens of asking questions specific to gender and social inclusion, but also environmental and social management and stakeholder engagement, because these are the same people that we are working with and that are integral and are centric to how the project is not just designed, but also implemented and reported. So in this particular design, we consulted with over 500 participants from communities. 47% of them were women. What kind of insight did they provide during these consultations? They validated their main livelihoods. They gave us a picture of what their role was in, for example, the engagement of crab harvesting for existing mangroves and subsistence fishing and farming. And they expressed concerns. So this is a very specific environmental and social component where the community has an insight on the effect of seawall construction to the fisheries and species in the intertidal area, and bringing that stressing that conservation emphasis. And in terms of roles, they agreed to provide assistance in the nursing and planning of the mangroves and maintenance of the vetiver. So who is at risk here? Consistently, we see that these are rural communities, those living by or near the coast, so the direct beneficiaries of the project. They are dependent on natural resources for their livelihood, on subsistence, fishing, and farming. And specifically, these are women who hold roles in gender roles in these communities, such as being primary collectors of water, fuel, wood, and held mostly responsible or primarily responsible for household water supply or food security. So when we think about women, we think of them in terms of their intersecting vulnerability and capacity and their gendered role, like not just women as a homogenous group. And throughout the consultations, there's some gender differentiated data that we were able to learn, such as with regards to the dependence on natural or coastal resources for livelihood. So in the Soliaga women's group, for example, led the harvest of starfish as organic manure for their mangrove nurseries. In other villages, they spoke about how they did their beekeeping and handwoven crafts as sources of livelihood. But often, consistently, what the analysis revealed, and this is where we think about the gaps then, because of social and gender norms, there's limited access to decision making for women in their different diversities in coastal zone and natural resource management. So they hold key roles, and we were able to document that and are hoping to continue documenting that. But their access to the decisions are not as equitable or not as equal as we would like to, as we see in these communities. And in the same way, they also have got limited access and control to environmental goods and services, again, as like a result or as an outcome of existing social and gender norms. So, of course, we don't stop at identification of risk and analysis of gaps. We think about design. What do we do about it in terms of the project? We're building a nature-based seawall. What are some of the things that we want to think about? And these actions have been reflected in the gender action plan. Maybe I will say that these are just sample activities, like there are others that speak to each stage of the project cycle, things such as scheduling training around women's care work schedules and things like that. But what I chose here 3 examples that I thought we might like. First is ensuring disaggregated data in the baseline assessment. So something we will conduct before construction commences and the trainings commence. So because we want to understand what is the diversity of people that we are working with? Are they young women? Are there special considerations or specific considerations we are needing to embed to make sure we are inclusive of disability? So that is how we want to do this, embedding this in the MEL and knowledge management segment of the project. Second is specific training modules that focus on gender and social inclusion. And how we phrase this is equitably shared upkeep and sustainability of seawalls. Of course, it depends on the context, but something we like to do, or at least I like to do, is sort of try to not keep using gender responsive as a term or gender sensitive, but to like use more precise wording that would then appeal to, say, not a gender specialist or your local government staff who is running this project. So equitably shared upkeep and sustainability of seawalls, something that looks at what men and women are doing in that process. And then thirdly, safeguards for the prevention of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, and accessible community level grievance mechanisms. We've referred to differences in context and role. So we want to make sure that that space is held and people and women are able to surface what complaints they have got or concerns around the project. And in this section, we then look at how we measure it. So these are the actions that we want to take. What will that look like? How do we know that we are, first of all, doing the, the right activity? And how are we measuring the change that we want to see? So percent inclusion, I've put some examples here, the percent inclusion of the disaggregated data, percentage of our training participants that are not just women. So it's not just like how many women and men attended, but thinking about how many of them are reporting confidence in their capacity to operate and maintain seawalls. So something that is more qualitative that we would have to do pre and post training surveys for, as an example. And in terms of our accountability, which SBC has invested a lot in as well, is the number percentage of our complaints that are satisfactorily resolved. And that is how we sort of try to concretize or operationalize our principles of GESI integration. Thank you for your patience. I wanted to share these couple of tools. And these are the ones that we like to start with. You don't have to be a gender advisor or a disability inclusion specialist to make use of these tools and apply them to your design and project. This first one is called a GESI mainstreaming checklist for developing climate finance proposals, and that would apply for NbS projects as well. So it asks very specific questions, for instance, on the concept note stage and exploring who we are consulting. And you'll see there's a breakdown here of the different groups that we might consult that are relevant to the project. So again, making sure to unpack what our community looks like and not assume that the needs and the priorities are the same across the board. It also asks around monitoring and evaluation. So the previous example that we shared where we have got GESI indicators and targets. So we're not just saying, oh, we are gender responsive, oh, we are socially inclusive. We're actually putting detail to that or being very specific on how we see that happening, how we operationalize that. And the other quick tool I wanted to share is this template of a gender action plan or assessment. So again, it's different in many contexts. What the Green Climate Fund and Adaptation Fund provide are very broad templates. We don't really have got a lot, but I will share that in the next slide in terms of Pacific set tools, and it's exciting because there's space for us to continue developing this. So this one pulls from existing material that we have got in Pacific gender mainstreaming, and then putting it in a template with clear annotated guidance for when you're developing a gender analysis and assessment and an action plan, and it asks against the Pacific context to help us shape that. And finally, just if there are some 5 resources for you that you should take from this session, it would be these. I'm happy to share the links along with Rakeshni, but it's very practical, grounded in context, and also helpful in making sure that how we design is not a generic approach, but something that really embeds these principles and puts them in action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kara, for that lovely presentation and for sharing the inspiring case studies and also the tools. Please do share the links with me so I can share it with the participants. Now, since we have had two very powerful presentation, I would say, from our GESI specialists, let's take a moment to reflect and I'd like to open the floor for your questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat or you can raise your hands and you can unmute and then ask question. I think I have this one question already. So we have got a question from Harshana. For the projects in Fiji on the 4 kilometers nature-based seawall, what was the seawall made up of? Did it include a hybrid seawall? While consultation included 47% of women, is it possible that even less women might benefit from the project due to inequality in social norms? If so, what can be done to include inequality in social norms? Kara and Devlin, if you can take the question.
Sure, thank you. And that is an excellent question. I was just pulling up on my screen what exactly the seawall would be composed of. So very briefly, it would be 3 rows of mangroves, 2 rows of large boulders, 3 rows of vetiver plant, and then some compacted hardcore fill of soapstones, clay, and soil. So it's I'm not sure if I'm able to share the visual of that here, but I'll try to do that later. So it's a mixture of these elements that go into the construction. Hope that answered that question. The second one that asks after, is it possible that even less women might benefit from the project due to inequity? It is possible, it always is. That is the risk that we always take and encounter when we design any kind or implement any kind of project. So what are we trying to do to remove that inequity? I would say the gender action plan first, the analysis based on stakeholder consultations and the situation, or for example, in a project of women and vulnerable marginalized groups in Fiji, we begin there. We do the gender action plan and those specific activities as an example that I've shared earlier. But then we also make an effort to embed that within the main project so that it's not just within the gender action plan that we're thinking about how are we facilitating consultations, for example, how are we opening these conversations as well of equity/inequity and having our communities or our stakeholders throughout the process think, first of all, be aware, reflect on what these social norms are. And that is what the focus training modules usually are designed to do. And then reading what is done about it and how that translates into the activities such as upkeep and maintenance of the seawalls. So I'll pause there. Thank you for that really good question.
Thank you so much, Kara. There's another question of the 14 villages that is earmarked for seawalls. How many of these are in the that's Reki province? Is there any villages? Would you have the data for that one, Kara?
I do not have the exact number of villages, but I'm pulling it up here. I know that there's at least 3 in
Yeah,
Raki
Reki
town.
province. Yeah.
Yes, at least 3 villages. Yes.
So thank you. If you have any more questions, we still have some time for some more questions. We can take another 1 or 2 questions if you have from for Kara and Devin in this session? While you are thinking about your questions, we will have just a quick icebreaker for you just to get you laughing. So, not actually laughing, but more energized before we move into a photo session and the rest of the speakers. So, just think about this. If you have nature-based superpowers, like you can do anything with nature and you have certain superpowers. If you could have one nature-based superpower, what would it be? So you can just drop it in the chat and we can have a look. If you have that type of superpower, what would it be? Thank you, Kara, for sharing the village name. Okay, water bending like Avatar, that's thank you. Restoring forest and ecosystem with a blink of eyes. Okay, that would be really easy, Ludo. And a power of regeneration. Any other superpowers that you want to share? If you get it for a moment and you want to share that with us? Power to control weather. Mangrove restoration, power to make people feel ecosystem, empathy, make people feel what nature feels. That's interesting, Uttale. Flora communications, yes. So there are some interesting things we can do if we get a superpower for a moment, maybe. So thank you so much. And you can keep sharing that in the chat. And if you have more questions, you can also share that. Thank you so much, Kara and Devin. And before we move to our next set of speakers, can we have a quick photo session? If you could smile for the camera, if you could just on cameras for a moment and we'll take a quick snip. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. And also thank you for sharing your inspiration. Inspiring to see the wisdom from across the Pacific that we share. Now let's shift our focus to the cultural dimensions. We have covered GESI. Now we'll move to the cultural dimensions of nature-based solutions. So I would like to give the floor to Francis.
Rakeshni, can I ask, can you see my screen?
I can see, but it's not in the presentation mode.
All right, give me a sec. Is it in presentation mode now?
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Pulavinaka, everyone. My name is Francis Vakauta, and I will be speaking to you on leveraging Indigenous knowledge for sustainability and resilience. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. If you don't mind, I'll turn my camera off and we can focus on the screen. And then when it comes to the discussion component, I'll turn my camera back on. So my intervention this morning focuses on the ways by which we can leverage Indigenous knowledge meaningfully and ethically. And you will hear those two words reiterated throughout the presentation, really to emphasize the significance of ethical engagement in collaboration with our Pacific cultural communities. It's a bit of a backdrop. This is, for those of you who may not be aware, this is a very interesting and exciting time in the Pacific's development history, because for the first time, we see a development consciousness that recognizes the role of culture for and in development. And this is reflected cutting across several key regional frameworks. And we have a selection on the screen here. In the past, while culture was seen as a barrier, today we can see it valued and prioritized in two ways. First, as a standalone development priority, so the development of the culture sector itself, as well as, secondly, a cross-cutting one. So regardless of the area of development, that culture has an important role to play. And so this new development perspective or approach really requires those of us in the development space to rethink how we engage with Indigenous and cultural communities, especially when we're trying to work with their knowledge systems in ways that honor their wisdom, but also respects their Indigenous cultural intellectual property. And that's what a portion of this presentation is going to focus on. I'm sure we all know that we have a lot to learn from Indigenous peoples about living in balance with the natural environment, something that they've practiced for centuries. But if we want to engage meaningfully with Pacific cultural communities, we need to understand these concepts of custodianship and Indigenous science. And we need to come to the table open to understand their worldviews and approaches. Indigenous worldviews speak to relationality, connectedness, and inherently ecological identities that are tied to place, that is grounded in relationships to land, sky, and sea. And you'd often hear people speak about their totems, such as birds for sky, trees for land, and fish for the sea. These relationships relate to spirituality and what it means to belong to a place and to be of a place, and are further reflected in rotational agriculture, sacred forests or trees, seasonal calendars, and customary marine tenure. One example related to the images on the screen here that some of you may have seen on social media and in the news is Matariki, or the Pleiades constellation of stars, which was very significant to Polynesian communities in general. But it's really interesting to see that there are variations of Matariki in Pacific indigenous languages across the three subregions. So Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia in the past once recognized the significance of the Pleiades. Aotearoa New Zealand is the first Pacific Oceania nation to commemorate Matariki as the Maori New Year, and it's a national holiday, a public holiday. It was celebrated last Friday, and it's generally observed during the winter months of June or July. It's seen as a time of reflection, of renewal and reconnection, guided by the rising of two important stars. So Matariki Pleiades and Puana, which is Rigel. The Indigenous New Year relates to the seasonal lunar calendar. So for Indigenous Maori from New Zealand, it marks the end of a cycle, the beginning of the new, and of course the aligning to the rhythm of the natural environment. It might be of interest to note that Cook Islands and Tahiti are also in the process of formally commemorating Matariki as well. And this is just one example. There are thousands of examples that we could discuss, but in the interest of time, we'll leave it at that. The relationship that indigenous peoples have with their natural world introduces us to an ecological knowledge system based on indigenous wisdom or indigenous science. In the past, many people talked about so ethnobiology, ethnobiodiversity, etc., whereas we're now shifting away from that and just saying indigenous science. And this indigenous wisdom is based on deep understanding of the connectedness and relationship between the land and sea, terrestrial plants, animal life, and marine ecosystems. And I'm sure that many of you, many of the Pacific Islanders in the virtual room today will be able to share with you at least one example of an elder who could tell you just from looking at which plants are flowering on land, what the corresponding activity is occurring at sea, which fish are plentiful, which ones are spawning, and how the community needs to act or respond. Oops, sorry about that. There's a lot of interest in accessing indigenous knowledge and traditional knowledge today, and we see that in all of the international texts and references, whether it's in relation to biodiversity or very specifically to climate change, you're seeing this reference to the opportunity to learn from indigenous peoples. Some of it with good intentions, but others with a less positive intent to extract knowledge for economic gain. And so we need to be very clear about what the principles for culturally grounded NbS is, or what does it mean to work ethically with indigenous and cultural communities. And so on this screen, we have a few of those principles. The first one is to respect their worldview and value spiritual and cultural ecosystem approaches, recognizing them as central to well-being, supporting indigenous governance and land rights, ensuring, as Devin had mentioned earlier, free, prior, and informed consent, and meaningful co-governance of initiatives. I also want to spend just a little bit of time emphasizing the need to be careful when we use the word resilience, especially when we use it alongside the words sustainable development rather than sustainability. I find it really interesting because we hear the word resilience used so much, it's thrown around so much these days, especially in relation to the environment and climate change. And it's funny, but the way that it's used has led many to believe that environmental resilience is the only type of resilience there is. Psychological and sociocultural resilience in any non-environmental context is rarely talked about, even though they are long-standing fields of study and work and are essential to the development work that we do. Resilience is sometimes romanticized and weaponized, and we need to be really mindful of the ways that this can happen, especially when it places a disproportionate burden of survival on communities while choosing to ignore some of the systemic root causes of deep-rooted problems. For example, praising communities for being resilient after a natural disaster rather than providing the support they need, or choosing to normalize suffering and trauma and suggesting that people should just be strong, get over it, and bounce back. So whenever we use the term resilience, we really must be clear on who is being asked to be resilient and for what. And we need to ask some questions. Are we strengthening communities' capacity to self-regulate unexpected shifts and challenges? Will our initiative ensure equitable accessibility, informed decision-making, active participation, or benefit sharing? And if it doesn't, then we need to reframe the language and terminology that we're using. When it comes to sustainable development, we know that there's a very clear underlying economic paradigm to sustainable development, which is very different to sustainability. So the preference, at least for me, is the use of resilience and sustainability rather than resilience and sustainable development. On this slide, here are just 4 examples, which I'm sure many of you are already familiar with, so I won't go into too much detail, but I thought it would be useful as a reminder so that we can keep these in mind as we think about some of the concepts and principles or guidelines for ethical engagement and remind ourselves why they are so important. The first one is around the Pacific LMMA networks. The second around the Australia, First Nations and Aboriginal fire management approaches and processes. Then we have India, Nepal sacred groves. And then we have our cultural designation of periodic no fishing zones observed in Tahiti through Rahui, Matauranga Maori in New Zealand, and of course, Tambu sites in Fiji. So how do we leverage Indigenous and traditional knowledge for NbS? First, we need to strengthen our own institutional competency and intelligence. What does that mean? Our capacity and competencies for working ethically with cultural communities, especially with non-state actors, such as our community leaders and elders, traditional leaders, for example. We also need to design activities that support Indigenous-led initiatives rather than the old school expert coming in to help. So it means we need to refine our collaborative ways of working approaches. Third, we must ensure community buy-in. And to do this, the community must see direct value and benefit in the initiatives, or they simply won't support it or engage. Understanding the socio-cultural structure of the community is also important, and who the knowledge holders are, so that we are engaging appropriately. And because Indigenous and traditional knowledge is collective knowledge, we need to learn to respect formal cultural protocol for accessing knowledge rather than speaking to individuals. This may sometimes begin with the line ministry involved and flagging not just the Ministry of Environment, but more importantly, the Culture Line Ministry, as they are tasked with the safeguarding of cultural heritage. And this is something that unfortunately is lacking these days in a lot of the development work that's happening. Intergenerational knowledge transfer is also important to ensure continuity and sustainability. So in building this into our projects and initiatives is critical. And of course, the need for biocultural indicators in NbS design, such as ecological health or cultural heritage vitality. On this slide, we have 3 images, 2 from the Festival of Pacific Arts and Culture, FESPAC 13, that was held in Hawaii in June last year. To the top, we have Papua New Guinea. To the right, we have Cook Islands. And at the bottom, an image of the Pohnpeian ceremonial Yam Festival, which also sheds a lot of light into the sacred relationship of Indigenous peoples in the Pacific with the land. Cultural, I'm not going to read through everything in this table, but just to say that culturally relevant approaches are more likely to be sustained because they are place-based, contextualized, and meaningful, and they allow the community to self-regulate their monitoring. So it's much more likely to be sustained beyond a project life. There are some real challenges here relating to the intentions of external agencies, their worldview, institutional mandates, expectations, and intended outcomes of a project or initiative. I think the first 2 on the one-dimensional siloed view and the capitalist paradigm are self-explanatory, so I won't go into that. And I'll only focus on the last one, the lack of legal mechanisms for the protection of Indigenous and traditional knowledge, which leaves our people open to exploitation and misappropriation. So the lack of legal protection is the biggest concern or problem when it comes to working with Indigenous or cultural communities in the Pacific, because there is no international treaty for the protection of traditional knowledge, and the majority of our Pacific members don't yet have legislature for its protection. Those that do still struggle with implementation. At the international level, WIPO negotiations have been going on for almost 2 decades on the development of 2 WIPO treaties on traditional knowledge and expressions of culture. Last year, in May 2024, the first treaty which addresses traditional knowledge was adopted, and this is the WIPO Treaty on Intellectual Property, Genetic Resources, and Traditional Knowledge, and it aims to prevent biopiracy and ensure transparency, traceability, and the recognition of indigenous peoples and local communities who have stewarded and shared this knowledge. This hasn't yet come into force, and as of June this year, so this month, WIPO is still waiting for 14 more ratifications in order for this to progress to the next level. So it's against this backdrop of a lack of legal protection that we have increasing interest in accessing indigenous and traditional knowledge for commercial interests, whether it's for cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, and even the entertainment industry. The list is really quite long. So it's this ongoing exploitation which doesn't bring benefit to the knowledge holders themselves. It's what highlights the need for ethical engagement. And we need to note that ecological knowledge that we are interested in NbS is often considered sacred and secret within the category of closed knowledge. So we really must ensure that our actions do not inadvertently open the door for further exploitation and misappropriation by commercial interests. Projects and programs that want to emphasize or focus on or capture indigenous and traditional knowledge usually end up collecting data. And this is where things get really tricky or messy. Let's take a little bit of a step back. For those of you who may not be fully aware, when we talk about indigenous peoples or cultural communities as knowledge holders, in international Western law, the ownership or intellectual property that's recognized is the ownership of the intangible cultural heritage. So the modality that it exists in is oral. It exists in oral stories, in that oral sharing. But in that Western framework, once you change the modality, the right also shifts. So once someone digitizes it, suddenly that ownership of that knowledge in the digital form, whether it's published, whether it's a video, whatever other format it takes shape in, the right then shifts to the person who owns that. So if I'm the first person to photograph something, if I'm the first person to audio record something, video record something, I can claim ownership. And this is where it gets really messy, unfortunately. And then a third level is when we take that data and information and put them into repositories or databases, because suddenly the ownership of the database has legal rights as well. And so this is why we really need to be careful in the gathering of knowledge, in the storage of knowledge, and the possible use through reports, publications of indigenous and traditional knowledge, which really require careful attention. So what does working ethically mean? It means free, prior, and informed consent, the principle of doing no harm, and working to empower the local community, recognizing cultural communities as rights holders, not just stakeholders, and working with them to understand how customary laws and governance can guide access and the actual use of knowledge and data. In bold at the bottom of the screen are 2 non-negotiables that the Indigenous Caucus to WIPO has outlined. Just 2. 1, the right to access, remove, and correct information that is stored and shared. And 2, if unpublished traditional knowledge is added to databases and information systems, it must be done with free, prior, and informed consent of the relevant Indigenous community. So these are some of the things that we need to be really, really mindful of. This is my last slide. And on this slide, I have 3 reflection questions that we might consider in our own time and at our own pace when we're ready to help us rethink our ways of working, to really reflect on how our current approaches and processes might be strengthened and improved. Vinaka. Over to you, Rakeshni.
Thank you so much, Francis. That was a very beautiful reminder of how culture and sustainability go hand in hand. It was so nice hearing that. And continuing on this thread, we now welcome Sadie. Sadie will take us deeper into traditional knowledge system. Over to you, Sadie.
Thank you, Rakeshni. Rakeshni, can you just confirm if you can see my screen?
Yes, Sadie, we can see the screen.
I am Sadie Tunolu, working with the climate change division in SBC. I'm the information and knowledge management officer. So continuing from Dr. Lakota, we'll be looking at revitalizing traditional knowledge systems in each of these solutions. So what I'll be touching on is traditional knowledge with science solution working together with science and integrating this into traditional knowledge, fostering community engagements and resilience and promoting sustainable building techniques. My approach is to look at science, which is earth-based solutions, and then how this would work together with our own traditional knowledge, effectively here in Fiji, which is the source of the I'll be touching on the definition of the deck building science solution, the sustainable method using bags, field, built with earth or natural materials, low cost, thermally effective, efficient and disaster resilient, cultural approach through traditional knowledge, and combining science and traditional knowledge for nature-based solutions. So just to increase my volume. So the definitions of the earth building, it's originated from ancient rammed earth techniques. It was usually seen as mud houses in African cultures, but this was modernized by Nadia Khalil in California, which is called the Park Earth Institute. This was then introduced to the community by in Fiji by Barbara and it evolved into super adobe and dome-based forms, so like a honeycomb. Now these houses can build with your own two hands as a community. It is locally available earth, sandbags, bonfires, and meets the modern day standards for safety, energy efficiency, and comfort. Now, constructing the earth bags is a sustainable method using bags filled with earth and the soil is a mixture of 10% to 35% of clay and soil, and then compacted into bags by ramming them into tube-like shapes. And this can be married to form any structures. Now, between them, barbed wires around so that it keeps the layers together. So this worked well for the community that had started building it. First in the ecological site in Dalsamo, where they were able to use red soil that was available on site or near the areas around Dalsamo. So just to walk through how this is done. So So when we're talking about community able to work through this type of building, you can have children, women that can work on this. So you have people that can fill in the bags into the sacks, and then wires are laid down between the sacks, and then see a child that's ramming this together. So once this structure is formed, it is then plastered over with cement. So very minimum materials are used, but a lot of labor is needed. So the types of structure that was able to be used for this solution was a house, which was like that was used as a chapel, a pool in a dam, a grotto that was used in the village, and a 300-meter river wall solution, retaining wall, and garden beds. Now, this is a low cost and thermally efficient and disaster resilient. So the earth bags are very low cost as they are developed of few materials. So this was used by sacks that you can get from this sacks was a source from E8 Fiji from Fujas that they had sold. And the barbed wires that was used, and cement for the out covering of the actual building. So the natural honeycomb structure was ideal for especially to withstand disaster resilience. So it's for cyclones. As you can see, the housing that was built, that was the first one built, is was able to withstand storms, and it's was sorry, the dome itself, when you enter, it's very cool. It regains air and is and traps the heats during cold nights. Now, the cultural approach that that worked together with this solution was through Solidarity. It worked well in the village setting, as Solidarity is more or less community working together for the betterment of the community. Solidarity is done in many communities in the Pacific. So this was sorry, for what Fijian villagers use for a particular day. They give up their time, resources to be able to work for a particular project for the whole community of the village. For women, they can weave mats for a particular family upcoming functions, clean the village halls, cook the food for the men that have gone up to the farms, who work on farms for the village settings, like village, traditional village owners. And now this social levaki is usually had by the chief if it's for the village. If it's for the family units, then it's the elder of the family that heads it, and or for the church as well. This is a real collective effort. It's a beautiful form of working together and sharing knowledge. The knowledge is in the hands. So these structures is only effective when people come together to build it, as it's a very labor-intensive work. So as I had said before, this actual building can be done by from children to women working together. So even the actual structure can be done by children, and since it's labor intensive and it has a lot of building, the women usually come together to actually cook for the men and children that are working on the site. So that was done during the village working together on the wall and also the dome. Now, combining this science and also nature-based solution for this particular village. So the villagers in Toko in Ovalau had a problem of water coming into the village. There were 8 houses across the river that had the river water coming in, especially during flooding, king tides, and high tides. So they took this same solution that they had learned from their work with at the ecological center in Osama and decided to build a river wall. So this river wall is 300 meters. And this was done purely by the villagers themselves and using this method of earth bag solution. They were able to build a river wall with buttresses on the side to ensure its stability. And had most of the men in the village come to actually work on the site. So as you can see, they've completed parts of the river wall, and there's a bit more drier on the side of where the 8 houses are located. But it still had some places where we couldn't actually complete because it needed, especially where the river outlets is from the village side. So the government has come to take a look at the river wall, and hopefully are going to be working together with the villagers to bring in a material that is actually needed now with more cost to help the village complete the river wall. And yes, that's the end of my presentation on working together with nature-based solution science and traditional and cultural practices. Over to you, Rakeshni.
Thank you so much, Sadie, for that rich insights, and the examples that you have given is really inspired. I'm sure it has inspired our participants. Now let's hear from the field. We have Sarah. Sarah will share how these principles come to life in coastal restoration that she is involved in. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you, Rakeshni. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, it's a pleasure to be part of this webinar. I was going to ask you, Rakeshni, if you could just help me out, just to pull up my presentation. Sorry, I'm having
Go
issues
ahead
with
and do that.
sharing
Sure. Just give me a
from my end. Thank you. So yeah, it's a rainy morning here at the usually sunny Rakiraki coast in the Ra province. Yeah, I only have 5 slides. I'll try and fit in everything I need to share. I'm always telling people it'll take us days if we were to share everything about the work that we're doing out here in the field, in the mangrove systems of the Naviti River Bay. Okay.
Just give me a moment, Sarah.
Yeah. Is it the right one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sir?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I was just worried because I made a few edits while listening to the other presentations that were going on. But yes, thank you. First of all, I'm Sarah. I'm the Blue Carbon Project Coordinator with the Conservation International Fiji Program. So we have, it's an honor, like I said earlier, it's an honor to be roped in to try and share some of the work that we are doing out here in the province of Ra on mangrove restoration as part of post-disaster rehabilitation for mangroves that were destroyed by Cyclone Winston in 2016 and had no way of naturally regenerating or recovering, as it was the usual way with any living thing. And then, so CI stepped in. Can we just have the next slide, please, Rakeshni? So Conservation International stepped in with our Blue Carbon project, which was funded by the Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So we started with the work in 2019, which resulted in the Naviti Levu Bay being chosen as the pilot site for mangrove restoration work. And then under this project, since it was on traditional fishing grounds, so we were to rope in the communities that had the access rights to these mangrove ecosystems to be part of the restoration of the mangroves that were damaged by TC Winston and in their recovery. So under the project, we brought in 5 communities from the nearby areas. So the 5 communities were Matoilevu, Nabunivi, Barotu, Neserlang, and Nanukloa. So the fishing ground is communally owned between the 2 districts of Savo and Nalawa. And as it was known as the Naviti Levu Bay project, Naviti Levu Bay is under the Nakorotumbo district, so we had to rope in the village of Nabunivi. That is why we have them involved. So we were tasked with restoring 30 hectares during the duration of the project, and we had to restore the particular species of Brugueria gymnorrhiza. These are the tall mangrove trees, not the usual rhizophora species that I've seen in few of the slides that I've shared, the one with the web, with roots up on ground. The one that we had to restore was a bit more of a complicated species, very particular in the manner that it needed to be restored. I know Ms. Rakeshni, because she has been to one of our sites. And yes, the invite is still open for you to revisit and maybe have a look again at how things look nowadays. And yes, so I will share with you the journey from when we started with the science that we brought in on how mangrove restoration is supposed to be done, and how it evolved as the communities, the indigenous communities became involved. Just the next slide, please. Okay. Oh, so this is not the, okay. So yeah, GESI. So we became introduced to the actual term of GESI, I think just last month when we had a training at our Suva office. And that was when we came to know that even though we have been actively working as the way that we've been doing our work, then we found out in Suva during the training that they have this collective term for it known as GESI. So sorry for the long form there. I think I had edited them while our presenter on GESI was presenting. So it's supposed to be gender equality, disability, and social inclusion. So thank you for that bit, broaden my knowledge as well on the GESI bit. So we managed to, during the tenure of the project, we managed to, I just have a bit of stats there. So it's always been the understanding that gender was solely to do with women and our involvement or equal involvement in the work that we do. So after going through a GESI training, then we found out that it's not necessarily that, it's just that we were to say that we can do as much as men can do. So you see in that picture, we have the members of our communities, the women, working alongside our youths and our men in restoration activities for the Blue Carbon project. And also on the disability end, we've also, for all the activities that we do, we rope in community representatives that are suitable for activities, and it is always inclusive. We try and get everyone on board to assist us with the work that we do. But out in the field of work, the actual project site, we have always been to safeguard ourselves, CI as an organization, and also our communities. We've always been led to we specifically ask for those who are physically fit and that can, because it is not may I say, a safe working area for most of us. So, but then we have other activities outside the actual work in the project site. So we have nurseries set up in communities. So that's where we involve those who are more not as physically fit as others to also be involved in the project. Nakrakeshni, next slide, please. Thank you. On traditional knowledge. So this is one of the things that we really got to think from the indigenous communities that we're working with. So like I said earlier, we brought in our science, and then we came with literature on this is how you're supposed to restore this particular species. Like I said, it's a very fuzzy species, the Bruguera species. It has a certain soil type, which we learned over time while working on this project. When we started with the restoration work in December of 2022. So there were a lot of trials and errors. So we worked on refining those. And then while we were progressing with the project, and then we also opened up a line of two-way communication with the communities. So we started seeking out the advice as well on their observations or their knowledge of how things were in their community, so on the fishing grounds, and these are fisher communities. So they get to enter these mangroves. They've been entering these mangroves since they were children practically. One, for subsistence use, and two, for also income generation. So we started reaching out to communities and when we thought maybe just try and seek some knowledge from them on how maybe we can refine some of the techniques we're using. So that really started off well because the community just came up and then they started sharing. Nature, it does things on its own terms. You can't really bring in human knowledge and try and introduce it into nature. So that was sort of things we think from our indigenous communities. So one of the things they taught us, and which we work with up until now, is that, so like I said, this Rhizophora species, I'm sorry, I don't have, but they have propagules, like hanging seedlings. So when we started, we were like picking wildlings on the ground to try and set up our nurseries within the damaged site. So our communities were watching us, and then we found out when we went to transplant these wildlings that we potted into planter bags, the plastic planter bags, and set them in situ nurseries, that when we actually went to transplant them into the ground, the survival rate was not as expected or was not good enough. So our community members are watching all this, and then they came on, and then they told us, they advised us, okay, when we were growing up, this is what we saw. The propagates will just fall off the tree, straight into the ground, and they grow on their own. And so we thought, okay, maybe we should start with that. Just pick the propagules or the seedlings of the trees and then put them into planter bags. And we did that. So it worked well, survival rates improved. And then, but at this point that we're at, we had to go back to maybe to fine tune the project and its deliverables. We went back to that knowledge that was shared by the indigenous community to pick it off the tree. And this time we have no use for those plastic planter bags or for those nurseries where we had to line up all the seedlings, and when it was restoration or transplant them, we'll go uplift them and move them. And then we've noticed this species, and according to our communities, it's a very fast, so a lot of movement doesn't really help it in its actual growth when it goes into the ground. So those are some of the things that our community is observing. They were helping us with these things. So when restoration got underway, so you'll see in that first picture, those are mud mounds. So while we were working, we were doing all this land clearing and we were pre-planting the areas. We started noticing these mud mounds. And then we had the women. They came in and then they informed us, hey, we have the species of, we have manas, mud lobsters. They're back on site. So we were asking them, how do you know this? And then they started pointing and see these mud mounds. These are homes for mud lobsters. So sorry, I don't have any pictures on hand to actually show you to prove to you, but I have a picture of the mud mound because that was how we got to find out that biodiversity was returning. Some species that had been gone from the Naviti level bay for a long while were making a return as a result of the restoration work that we are doing. You'll see in the second picture, there's a bed there held up by a lady. On the project side, it used to be a bed sanctuary. According to the communities, when we tried And they were so happy with the fact that the bats had made a return to this mangrove site. And in the third picture, one of the things that they've also observed our communities is the increasing sizes of not only the mud crabs, but all other species that called the mangroves home before Winston destroyed their homes. So these are some of the instances where our communities really helped us out, engaging the impacts of the work that we've been doing. So it is their knowledge on the mangrove ecosystem and its inhabitants. They shared that with us. This used to be the case before Winston. And now, so we know that we're making an impact to the work we're doing because of the feedback from our communities on how things have changed. And also, when we came in, we were not really familiar with the fruiting of these propagules that we needed for our restoration. So that's why we initially started with potting wildlings that were already growing and reported them to planter banks. So then now, with help from the Ministry of Ethiopic Affairs, Fiji's Ministry of Ethiopic Affairs, we got the calendar. There is this calendar for what occurs on every Fijian month. And then the only information we gleaned from there was the fruiting season for the tiri or the Rhizophora species, not specifically for Bulgaria. So on that, we had to work with the communities again. So they shared, usually at this time, this is when they start fruiting. So we started scheduling our work plan as to have our potting or our germination period within the time that they had indicated, the months when these Bulgaria species start fruiting their propagules. So there's always a lot of back and forth with us and our communities because we know they know best. Something that's about them, for them, they will know best. It's always best that we always reach out to our communities and because they know better than we do. Next slide, please, Rakeshni. And I think it'll be the last slide as well. So yes, so it's just two pictures I'm sharing there. The one above, that was before restoration. That is the damage that was made by Cyclone Winston. And on the right is 1 year after we started with our restoration work. So you see all the healthy mangrove plants that are growing on the site that was before we did all the clearing and all the activities that we needed in order to get our restoration underway. So that's all from me this afternoon. And once again, thank you, Rakeshni, for reaching out. And we're always happy to share our blue carbon story. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for those things that you have shared. What I would say is that those are the best practices that we are yet to learn from as we move towards sustainability. So thank you so much, Sarah, for I just reached out Sarah in the maybe last 2 weeks ago, and she was happy to be part of this webinar. So thank you, Sarah, for that. And so we can see that what I would say, what a powerful set of stories and strategies that are in place that our experts and also are working on the ground. So let's take a few moments now to hear your thoughts and questions for our speakers. Again, you can drop on the chat and also please feel free to comment and ask question. Just unmute or raise your hand and you can share your experience if you want. Or you can have comments and questions for the speaker. So this is the time now. So if you have any questions, please go ahead. We have some comments from our audience. So it's from Yvette. Thank you so much for this informative presentation. So I really like the part where you stated we need to be careful on the. So this was for Francis. So thank you so much. And then we have some more. You could read the comments by the participants. If you have any burning questions and comments, please, this is the opportunity, you can do so. So you're very quiet out there, so it means that we can understand that the presentations were really clear and very inspiring. I said, where we like to hear this in the form of stories that makes us our work better, because we all are from the background where we are looking for these stories and also strategies and tools to make our work better, and as we move towards a sustainable NbS. So if you do not have any questions or you are still thinking, we still have time. So you can put the questions on the chat box. And also I would like to give this opportunity for you to reflect the PIPIN webinar series, like how did you feel, and if you have any comments and questions regarding that, please also, this is the time you can put it on the chat box. And so as we approach the closing, as we approach the end of the session today and the final chapter of our PIPIN webinar series, so as we close up, so first of all, thank you all for joining. So thank you for being part of today's session and also your continued engagement throughout the PIPIN webinar series. So at this point, we finish our series and we'll stay connected for upcoming trainings that is in nature-based solutions. So I've got emails of all of you and I've been in contact with you. So it's just like we have made a communities of practice, I would say, where I will continue to interact with you if we have upcoming trainings, and if you want to reach out to any of our experts or speakers in any of the webinars, feel free to do so. Use all the readings that were shared, recording that was shared, and also the presentations that we have shared as post-webinar materials. You feel free to use the tools and reach out to us on that. So let's stay connected on this. And certificates for participation. So if you have attended this series for at least we recommended you to attend more than 6, but I've also got some messages from you that you were busy. There were some things that was happening in the country and we understood. So if you have attended, I would say, most of the webinars, so we will reach out to you to give you a certificate of participation. So that I will be reaching out shortly. And so I think I've got a question in the chat before I continue. So it is from Jobson. Traditional knowledge and science work with ecology. How is it efficient to community? Does it damage the environment? So I think what the question is, like, when we integrate traditional knowledge and science, when we do some work, or we can say protection of environment, or how is it efficient to community? So what he means is, when we integrate, is it efficient, and does it damage the environment? So any one of the speakers, Francis, Sadie, or Sarah, would you like to take this question from Jobson? It's more like
Yes, thank you, Kashmi.
thank you.
So what I was trying to say there is that, like I said, with this particular species of mangroves, there's little or limited literature on its restoration, and we didn't really have a guide. So when we came in, we integrated our knowledge of restoration from our terrestrial landscape. And those were some of the sciences we brought with us, is that because those were proven scientifically to have worked on our terrestrial landscape. So when we went into the mangroves, we were using these plastic planter bags. So on as the project progressed, yes, you're right there. That was doing. It was contributing to damaging environment as we were using plastic. So when we took on the shared traditional ecological knowledge or traditional knowledge from indigenous communities, and now we started to actually no use of plastic at all. Those planter bags, and it's working really well now for us. Not only for us, but also for the mangrove ecosystem that we work in, because there is less use of plastic now. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Sarah, for that one. So while you think of more questions, you can or clarifications. So I've just shared a feedback link. So in all webinars, I have shared a link and most of you have filled the link. So please, this is for the final one. Just take few minutes to fill the link so that it will give us more ideas on how to go ahead in future trainings. And apart from that, let's continue. Let's have the conversation going. While the Pippin webinar series ends today here, we have covered a lot of topics that we got from our needs assessment, and we tried to cover this in this series. Also, just going over the feedback, we have also got a feedback that you need, face-to-face training on this, and this, especially with Mel and project implementation, development. This time is not enough, but we tried to cover it in this one. And should there be future trainings, we'll be in contact with you. Like I said, let's keep the conversation going. Let's continue to share the knowledge, stories, and solutions beyond the series. Together, we can build a stronger and more inclusive Pacific communities. So, whatever you have learned, please do share it with your communities, people you are working with, projects, so that they are aware of what is needed and how we can promote nature-based solutions in the Pacific Islands.
Rakashni,
Yeah,
sorry, can I just take a stab at
sure.
answering Jobson's question as well?
Sure, Sid.
So in terms of the earth bag building, so for the 3 sites that it was done at, excavating the soil itself. We looked at places that it was also helping with the actual place that we were excavating the soil. So for the wall, this was got from creating actual river man-made river banks. So we were able to use the soil from that one spot to actually make the 300-meter river wall. And for the grotto, that was got from where landslides happened. So the prevention of landslides. So we took soil from it. So it's actually working together with the site of where you're working to extract, excavate the soil. That answers your question as well. So it's just working together with your environment and the site that you're working. Okay.
Thank you so much, Sadie, for adding to that. So, Jobson, I hope that answers your question. And for the last part of it, I will be again sharing the post-webinar materials with you. So you have in that link from webinar 1 to 8, you have access to that till I think September. So before that, try to download it before the links expires. And also I'll be, like I said, I'll keep in touch with your certificates and also upcoming trainings that we will like you to be part of it. And so before we leave, uh, thank you so much for your participation and also sharing the knowledge with us. And just take a moment to complete the final feedback link before you leave. So thank you so much for joining. So I'll open this. This will be open for the next. So we have Michael Yes, Michael, you have a question or comment. Please feel free to unmute and you can
Yeah,
speak.
thank you. Thank you, Rakensi. I'm just looking at the Jobson question, and I thought I would just add a discussion. What I see from presentation and looking in practical life is that traditional knowledge are passed down from generation and sometimes unchangeable because the same knowledge has been passed down through generations and it's always there, and people have been living it and practicing it. While science, there are changes over time. And based on research, probably science would say, oh, this has happened in this place or that place. And they would probably give a case study to prove, or they may give changing data to prove different. Yeah, but what I think is traditional knowledge probably could be more reliable because it has been consistent most of the time, whereas science probably look at changing trends, changing environment, and based on research. And both are reliable, except that traditional knowledge probably is a bit, yeah, to me, I think it's more reliable because people actually lived it and they know it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for that addition. And thank you everyone for joining today. So we are concluding a bit earlier today for this webinar. So I wish you all the best for the rest of the day and let's keep in touch. Please, before we leave, the meeting will be open for another 5 minutes. Do fill the feedback link before you leave. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rakeshni.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Kashni.
Kashni.